So let's move now to our next guest, Pascal Finette. Welcome back, Pascal.
Michael, thank you so much for having me.
It's great to see you. Pascal is a good friend and someone we at AICPA and CPA.com have been collaborating with really for the past 5 years. And Pascal is kind of our subject matter expert, chief energy person as it relates to maybe making sense of where the world is going, kind of innovation and future state. And so we're really excited to have him with us here today. Pascal is the co-founder and chief heretic of Be Radical. And Be Radical really does focus on all aspects of innovation. And again, we've collaborated with Pascal quite a bit over the last few years and have put out a lot of resources around innovation, emerging technologies, the future of work, resources, toolkits that are all available free of charge on the CPA.com website. So please go ahead and take advantage of them. But Pascal, what we wanted to talk about here today is you're out with a new book. And we kind of want to make the connection between some of the principles in that book and really some of the conversations we've had as recently as a few weeks ago in the town hall, specific to kind of generative AI and how we see it impacting the profession. But I know the book is sort of essentially a triptych, which is the kind of convergence of three connected principles. But maybe we can start with you, and I know in writing this book, you kind of interviewed 50 plus thought leaders around disruption and innovation. And maybe we can start with you just kind of telling us a little bit about the impetus for the book and this whole concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So the origin story of the book is I spent my whole career thinking about innovation and disruption. And quite frankly, I got over the last couple of years, I got pretty dismayed with the use of the word disruption because it's being thrown around and essentially has become rather meaningless. So about 4.5 years ago, triggered by a couple of conversations I had with truly incredible leaders who managed to transform their organizations and stay relevant over really long periods of times, we started interviewing people and looking also at our own body of work, but really interviewing people and asked them one simple question. So we picked truly the best transformation leaders in the world across industries and asked them one question, which was, don't give me the strategy, don't show me the PowerPoints, just tell me what the heck did you actually do? And what's so fascinating is when you ask that question, you get some really interesting insights. And as you can imagine, if you speak to enough people, you get enough interesting insights. They then form patterns, and those are the patterns we have laid out in the book. And very briefly talking about this 3-step we have in the book, we talk about first decoding the future. This is really your ability to better read the tea leaves which make up the future. And of course, if you've seen any of my work we've done with the AICPA, and I invite you, as you already mentioned, there's lots and lots of resources which we made available for free for the profession. There's a lot of work we have done in anticipating the future. Then the second one is really this idea around disruption. And the perspective we have on disruption is probably somewhat antithetical. So instead of continuing to ask ourselves, what's new, what's new, what's new? We ask ourselves the opposite question, which is, what is actually not going to change? And that's an important question to ask because really, that's what you build your businesses on. And I was just at the G400. We had a wonderful conversation about the impact of AI. And I pointed out to people, really, if you're thinking about this as a practitioner in the profession, really asking yourself the question, your client needs, they're actually not changing. Your client still wants to have peace of mind, better financial planning, whatever it is they come to you with. What changes is the way how we're doing these things. And that's the reason why we call this notion around disruption state changes. So you go from one state, one way of doing things, to another way of doing things. And really AI is nothing but a massive, admittedly, massive state change. So the fundamentals don't change. And the last one is then really is around transformation. And that's the question of how do you as an individual, as a leader, and as an organization act in terms of the do's and the don'ts, in terms of like how do you actually move forward in this future. So that's what the book is about. We did our utmost best, and if you know me, I'm always really focused on keeping things short and concise. So we did our utmost best to like put all of this relatively condensed information into a little less than 250 pages. So it's a quick read, and really it's meant to be a book which hopefully you make lots of little notes in, and put post-its in there and go back to it as you're going through your own transformational journey.
So Pascal, I love this concept of maybe focusing on what won't change, because I think at the end of the day, it gives more control to people. Yes. I think they feel that they're better at predicting what won't than what might, or how it might. So that's a great concept. But let's drill down maybe a little bit more into the state of change concept, because it seems highly relevant to the discussion Eric just had a couple of weeks ago on this town hall with regard to large language models and generative AI. So maybe you can connect those dots.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea around state changes is it's a concept we borrowed out of the world of physics. So any physics majors out here, please forgive me, gross oversimplification. But the basic idea is in a state change, and the easiest way to think about this is water. It's frozen when it's really cold. You increase the temperature, you increase the entropy, it becomes actual water. You do this even more and becomes a gas state. And the in-between is called a state change. And what's important to understand in a state change, the reason why we think this model works so nicely, is twofold. One is the underlying molecule H2O doesn't change. In our world, if we translate this, is what Clayton Christensen once called the underlying consumer need, the job to be done, does not change. So that's the nice thing about, and we should take comfort in this as a profession. There's a lot of jobs we do for our clients. You do for me as me being a client of you, which don't change. What changes is the way we fulfill those, right? So where, back in the day, you might have done your calculations on paper, and then eventually you put them into Excel spreadsheets, and now we are using, increasingly AI to do this. The important thing with state changes, though, is that when you have a very transformational state change, when you go really from like one very defined way of doing things to a very different way of doing things, and I would argue that AI is a little bit like that, not a little bit, it might be quite a bit like that. What happens in state changes is that essentially overnight, your existing skills and processes become somewhat obsolete. And that's a really dangerous thing if you're not prepared for it. So that's the reason why, the message we have for leaders is you really need to prepare for this world of AI we're moving into, as in really thinking about what are the skills we need to learn, what are the things we might need to unlearn. So a good example is you might know very, very well how to make a very nice pivot table in Excel. I'm fairly sure that with the next version of Microsoft, which will have something called Copilot built in, which creates these things for you, made out of thin air by just you talking to the system, that skill might not be as relevant as different other skills will become. So that is, I think, the most important thing you can take out of state changes.
That's great, Pascal. And maybe just in closing, talk a little bit more about the skills you think leaders in the profession will need to stay relevant and successful.
It sounds so flat and trivial, but I think it's really important. It really goes back to a first principles way of thinking about the world, or ultimately common sense, which, by the way, doesn't make it common practice very often, unfortunately. But it's really about being curious. Honestly, it is about you as a leader, as a practitioner in your firm, as an owner, as an employee. Just become curious about what's actually out there, what's happening, and then really have the ability and the willingness to experiment and learn. So instead of sitting there and trying to find the perfect solution, which in this world of uncertainty and ambiguity we are now living in, really focusing on how do I actually make these little baby steps? How do I try things out? Go to your vendors and ask them, hey, what do you do in terms of AI? Can I give it a try? Can I give it a whirl, try it out? And what you learn is that you learn to learn. And that, I think, there's a really important skill we need to exhibit as leaders in this world of increasing uncertainty and ambiguity.